Today's guest is Benjamin Hardy. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is an organizational psychologist and the best-selling author of Willpower Doesn't Work and his brand new book, Personality Isn't Permanent. Benjamin, thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be with you. Let's just put it this way. You know, in DISC is a very popular one. DISC, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs. These tests are interesting, and I think that people really enjoy them. But they first off, they're not really valid. They're not necessarily studying what they say they're studying. They're not reliable because you can get different scores in different situations and in different environments and in different times. And so they're essentially pseudoscience. They're not really good science. I'll kind of highlight some of the problems. Sure. One is from a psychological perspective, context is really important. You know, you can't really understand something without understanding the context. And these tests fundamentally ignore context. So there's a huge focus on content and a huge ignorance of context. And in different contexts, you're going to show up different ways. People are far more dynamic than that. But also, Ellen Langer, who's been studying mindfulness at Harvard for the past 40 years, has spent a lot of time studying what leads people to being mindless. And when you're mindless, you're essentially not aware of what's going on. You're not being mindful, and you're not making good decisions. You're not noticing change. You're not being adaptable. And one of the biggest ways that people become mindless is if they overly adopt a label. You know, if you define yourself as depressed, as an example, you think you're always depressed. You see yourself through the lens of the label, but what you don't realize is that you're actually acting from a non-depressed perspective many times throughout a day, but you don't pay attention to those because you're only focused on the label. Like in selective attention, it's kind of like when you buy a car. When you buy a car, you see that car everywhere, you know? So like that's what a label does, is you see the label, but you don't notice all the times when the label is not true, which are actually very often. And another big problem is that once you've assumed a label, you've made it such a big part of your identity that you now defend it, and you now try to confirm it. You try to confirm the label and set goals to confirm it, to prove to yourself and everyone else that you're this person, you're this introvert, or you're this person. And so it can really stunt your growth. It can stunt you from being someone potentially who you'd want to be, or it would stunt you from having the imagination or the flexibility to being someone different. Usually if you've had a huge label that you've defined yourself as, you're very non-flexible outside of that label. So if you see yourself as an introvert, you then have kind of a fixed mindset about anything that's outside of that. You know, you don't see yourself in different ways. And so it leads you to being very inflexible about who you can be.
You talked about introvertness, extrovertness. Obviously, there's some level of temperament involved. What's the level of flexibility that's available to an individual?
I think flexibility is developed. You know, some people probably have it more than others in the beginning, but you develop flexibility by becoming increasingly confident. You know, the more confident you become and the better you can handle uncertainty in new situations. So essentially, it's a good way of looking, a simplistic but a good way of looking at personality is that it's your comfort zone. It's what you're comfortable doing. It's what's safe. Anything outside of what's typical for you, your habits and things like that, you're going to deal with a little bit of uncertainty. You're going to be doing things that are outside your comfort zone. And when you're outside your comfort zone, it usually takes courage, or, you know, you're doing something new. You can't fully predict the outcomes. And so it takes flexibility to try new things, to deal with ambiguity, uncertainty, complexity. But the more you handle it, the more flexible you can become. And so you can become more adaptive and more flexible by being in situations, you know, like if you're so emotionally rigid that you can't handle novelty and newness and difficulty, then your options are incredibly limited. Is all you're going to do is what feels safe or what feels comfortable. And obviously, you know, from an evolutionary perspective, Charles Darwin said it's not the strongest or the smartest that, you know, survives or succeeds. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change. We're in a world of a lot of change. And if you can't handle novelty or newness, if you're not flexible, you're not going to be able to learn. Like, flexibility is part of learning, you know? And so, yeah, I think it's incredibly important, and we can all become more flexible and confident. I mean, confidence and flexibility are kind of similar. You know, if you're confident, you'll put yourself in situations that you've never done stuff before. You'll try things that might not work. You won't over-attach to failures along the way. You won't get so upset. You know, you'll emotionally regulate along the way, and you'll be able to handle your emotions.
You mentioned about flexibility and confidence. Like, are there things that you recommend to people on building that up?
I think that the best way to do it, honestly, is to define goals and make progress towards goals. Like, you know, goals that are above your current capabilities. There's a quote from Dan Sullivan, who is the founder of Strategic Coach, actually right up there in Canada. And he said, confidence is built by making progress towards goals above your current capabilities. That's kind of how it works, is you have to move in a goal directed direction. I mean, I think you could, other things you could do is honestly just try things you've never done. You could learn a new language, develop new hobbies, be around new people. I mean, a lot of it, you can build flexibility by just trying new things and, stuff that's outside your current persona. But I think that the best way to do it is by pursuing a goal, pursuing a purpose, and having that purpose kind of change you and transform you. Just as an example, my wife and I, when we were first year graduate students, we'd never been parents before, but we took on the challenge, you could say, of being going from 0 to 3, having 3 foster kids from a very tough environment. And, there's a good quote from William Durant. He's the famous historian. And he said that the ability of the average person could be doubled if the situation demanded it. And so, I mean, if you put yourself in a situation where you're required to do things that are, I call it a forcing function. You're forced or required to do things that you wouldn't typically do. Like I wouldn't typically, when we became parents of these 3 kids out of the blue, it was a decision we made. We chose to do that, but we had to learn all sorts of stuff that were not necessarily easy. We had to learn how to be patient and deal with their behavioral issues and put their needs above our own and I don't know. You had to learn how to be flexible, because if you weren't, you'd freak out at the kids, and that would create more problems. And so it's good to put yourself in situations where you've got to learn skills and develop attributes where you can. And so I would say there's lots of different ways you can do it. But I think at the end of the day, it's pursuing things that are meaningful, that require that you become a better version of yourself in order to do it.
You've built up quite a following on Medium, and you grew out, I think, from 0 to 400,000 in a short period of time. Was that a goal, or that just happened? Was there a strategy there?
Of course, there was a strategy. Yeah, I mean, I think that just as an example, there's a lot of so Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hour rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good rule. It's actually not a real rule, because people can do things for 10,000 hours and not get any better. People can write 1,000 blog posts and still be amateurs. So it's not about doing something repetitiously. That's not good learning. Deliberate practice is really where the idea came from. And deliberate practice requires that you have a future self in mind. Deliberate practice is essentially transformational learning, where you're working towards a goal. And so I very much had a goal. My goal was to become a professional writer. I wanted to get a 6-figure book deal with one of the big major New York publishers. And in order to do that, I got the information, and I asked tons of authors and agents and stuff. I'm like, how do you get a 6-figure book contract? And they all said, you're going to probably have to get over 100,000 email subscribers. And so that was my goal. Your goal always shapes the process. And so for me, I wasn't blogging to blog. I was blogging to get 100,000 emails so that I could get my book deal and do what I wanted to do. Yeah. And obviously I enjoyed blogging. I didn't hate the process. I enjoyed it, but I was purposeful about the process. I was deliberate in my practice. And so, if you're not getting the results you want, you need to adjust the process, and you got to increase your commitment to the process and your courage. And so, yeah, I was very deliberate, and I'm deliberate right now in what I'm doing. What got you here won't get you there. I don't write on Medium very much anymore now, because it's not that relevant to my goals. It got me here, but the goals now have shifted. My future self has shifted. And so a lot of people, they get stuck in a persona and stuck in an identity where they keep doing what they did before because it used to work. But you shouldn't obsess with a process. Instead, you should, really get committed to a future and then determine the right process for getting there.
You talked about overcoming a lot of challenges when you were young. Can you tell me about some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I was 11 years old, my parents got divorced, and it was very painful. Led my father to becoming an extreme drug addict, to be honest with you. He was just in a deep depression, and I didn't really get it when I was 11 years old and 12, 13, 14 during this episode. I couldn't understand where he was at, and I was too young to understand, and we just didn't have great conversations back then. But he was in a deep, deep state where he was doing pretty much, terrible drugs. His home became a bad environment, and I was pretty much, I was the oldest of 3 boys, and it was really rough. My mom was trying to run a small business with her sister, and so we just had very little stability. And I just, as a young kid, you just don't really know how to handle that. You're kind of just in a stress state. I don't know. I still don't know to this day how I ended up graduating from high school. but I did. Somehow I did. And after high school, I ended up just playing video games all day, living at my cousin's house, playing World of Warcraft, not holding a job, not having any purpose in my life. I dropped out of college. I went to community college for like a week. I took one class and just dropped it because I couldn't do it. Had no learning skills or ability. What happened though was I ended up serving a church mission. That's the big thing for me that changed my life. I was really just not happy with my life, and so I decided I needed to get out, and just felt like a church mission would be a great opportunity to get out of that situation and learn new things and hopefully restart my life. And that's really the thing that changed everything for me, was just being in a new situation, having a new role, letting go of the past, being around new people, doing community service, reading tons of books, journaling, getting support from leaders. I mean, I went through so much change during that experience that I came back a totally different person. So and that's what led me to wanting to write, and that's what led me to studying psychology.
Was it one moment, or did it kind of develop over time?
Both. It was definitely both. I mean, I made the decision to leave. That's a moment, but the transformation happens over time. But I mean, big decisions often happen in moments, and so it's both. But I mean, I'm still changing. I'm not the same person I was on that mission. I'm not the same person as I was 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm guessing that you're not the same person you were 3 or 4 years ago. And so it is a development, but also there are pivotal moments. And so it's both. And I think that pivotal moments then lead to developmental processes.
Or let's say someone else is struggling with it. Is there things that you can do to help them along that path?
You have to. Yeah. Change doesn't always happen from the inside out. Sometimes it happens from the outside in. Sometimes by changing environments, you can then go through the change. And so, I would say people who are struggling need help. And if you're struggling, you need help. And we all need help. None of us are above that. And one of the big reasons people get trapped in their, persona, or they get stuck in the past, is because of traumatic experiences. And traumas are really any negative event that kind of keeps you stuck and limits your potential. And so, in order to release that, you usually need to not only journal about it and reflect on it and start to reframe it and think about the positives or the goods that have come out of it and start to think about moving back towards your future. But usually you need supportive people around you as well that you can express your negative emotions to and express your fears, your anxieties, or your pains. I mean, you need to share what you've dealt with so that then you can start to process it and rethink it and get moving back towards the future. We all need help. I mean, even if you're pursuing big goals, you need support. You need mentors, coaches, you need friends. We all need encouragement to break past the plateaus. The bigger your goals, the more support you need, emotionally and, practically speaking.